Welcome to WG University, Weber Gallagher's series of educational programs. This is our employment group webinar series. I am Julie Kinkoff and I am presenting today from our Philadelphia office. Today's presentation is Preventing and Dealing with Sexual Harassment in the Workplace. Don't delay, handle it now. If you would like to view the webinar again, share it with others, or see other WG University programs, you can visit our Weber Gallagher website, www.wglaw.com. And you'll find copies of this presentation and others under the WG University page. Also, feel free to contact the firm with any questions at questions@wglaw.com. Okay, so let's get started. What we're going to cover today is an overview of some of the employer's responsibilities. We're going to talk a little bit about essential policies and training and what your organization needs to be doing. And we're also going to talk about how to respond to complaints if or when you receive them. A few basics. What is discrimination? Discrimination is unfair or unequal treatment of an individual based on certain characteristics, such as race, gender, that sort of thing. Harassment is a form of employment discrimination. Harassment is unwelcome conduct that is based on any of the protected classes, race, color, religion, sex, national origin, age, disability, that sort of thing. Today we're focusing on sexual harassment, but it's important to note that all sorts of harassment based on any of the protected classes is unlawful. So when it comes to sexual harassment, there are two types: quid pro quo and hostile work environment. Quid pro quo literally means this for that, and that is unwelcome sexual advances or requests for sexual favors or other verbal or physical conduct that is made explicitly or implicitly a term or condition of employment, or the submission to or rejection of such conduct is used as a basis for employment decisions. Now that's quite a mouthful, but basically it means if you do this for me, I will do this for you. Or if you don't do this for me, then I won't do this for you, or I will do this bad thing to your employment. So quid pro quo is pretty obvious. Usually it's easy to spot. The more tougher one to spot sometimes is hostile work environment. Hostile work environment is certainly more prevalent. It is what most sexual harassment claims are based on, and it is unwelcome conduct of a sexual nature that creates a hostile, offensive, or intimidating work environment, or unreasonably interferes with an employee's work performance. Now, the victims of a hostile work environment can be the person that the conduct or the comments are directed to, or they can be others that are affected by those comments or conduct. Now, as far as employer liability for harassment, that's what we're most concerned about here. An employer will automatically be liable for harassment if that harassment is by a supervisor and it results in negative employment actions, such as a termination or a failure to promote, or a loss of wages, or loss of a promotion, loss of a job, any sort of termination, or maybe loss of a favored assignment or that sort of thing. Anything that is a employment action is going to result in automatic liability. Now, an employer will be liable for harassment of non-supervisory employees, or even people who are not employees at all, such as clients or independent contractors or customers that are on the premises, if the employer knew or should have known about the harassment and failed to take prompt and appropriate corrective action. So what constitutes harassment? As I said before, it's creating an intimidating, hostile, or offensive work environment. That it unreasonably interferes with an employee's work performance, or it results in adverse employment actions. They can be verbal, it can be visual, such as social media, such as emails, anything like that. It can be physical, actually touching someone. Harassment can be subtle. It doesn't always have to be obvious. It can be subtle, it can be intentional, and it can be unintentional. So let's look at some examples. Examples of physical harassment. Those are the things that, just exactly what you would think they'd be. neck rubs, shoulder rubs, touching somebody, standing close to somebody, brushing against somebody, anything like that. Verbal examples of verbal harassment can be calling somebody names, girl, honey, hunk, sissy, that sort of thing. Any sort of sexual comments, innuendo, jokes, those can be actually said, or they can also be in emails or on social media posts or that sort of thing. Spreading gossip about someone's sex life, asking someone about their sex life, those sort of things are also verbal harassment. And repeatedly asking someone out after they say no. Nonverbal harassment can be looking someone up and down, staring at them, leering at them, blocking someone's path so that they can't walk by, displaying suggestive items. This would be, the old example of that would be the calendar with the swimsuit models or that sort of thing. Or other suggestive items like that, winking, leering. Also, giving personal gifts that are of a personal nature that are not appropriate for the workplace. So who can be the harasser? The harasser can obviously be a supervisor, and as I said before, the supervisor, that can lead to strict liability in certain circumstances. It can also be a coworker, and it can also be a non-employee, such as a client or a vendor. So what do you do and how do you recognize whether something is a hostile work environment? Here are some questions you can ask yourself. Does the hostile behavior in question occur on a frequent basis so that it would be considered pervasive? Is it severe in nature? Is the offensive behavior physically threatening or humiliating? Is it done in front of others? Those sort of things. Does the conduct unreasonably interfere with the complaining employee's ability to perform his or her job duties, or otherwise affect some other term, condition, or privilege of employment that that employee has? Now, it's also important to know what harassment is not. Harassment is not occasional teasing, it's not an offhand comment, and it's not an isolated incident that is not serious in nature. Even an isolated incident, if it is serious in nature, can be harassing. But if it's a one-time thing and it's not serious in nature, then that generally is not considered harassment. Here's some questions for you. If everyone is laughing at a joke, it cannot be considered harassing. Is that true or false? Obviously, that is false. If the harasser did not intend to harass, can it still be considered harassing? Obviously, that also is false. It doesn't matter if you intend the comment or the joke to be harassing. If it is taken as harassing or if it is taken as inappropriate, then it probably is. And the most common thing that you hear from people who are accused of sexual harassment or any form of harassment is, "Oh, I was just kidding. I didn't mean it that way." It doesn't matter if you mean it that way. It can still be considered harassing. So let's talk about what employers need to do in order to prevent and deal with harassment in the workplace. First and foremost, you need to have a strong and comprehensive anti-harassment policy. We're going to talk about what that policy should include in just a minute, but it needs to be a policy that is well documented and it is well publicized and that your employees know about. You should also have them sign acknowledgments that they received the policy and that they understand it. The policy must contain an accessible complaint procedures, and we'll talk about those too in just a minute. But that is, it must provide employees with an avenue to raise complaints if they need to. Employers should also conduct regular interactive training. That training should be tailored towards your organization and your environment. Training for a law firm is going to be different than training for a factory floor or training for a restaurant. And the training that you conduct for your organization should be tailored for that organization and for the challenges that that organization has. And also, it's important that your organization has an environment that emphasizes consistent and demonstrated accountability. This comes from the top. You want to have an organization that has a culture of mutual respect. You want to have committed and engaged leadership. As with everything else when it comes to corporate culture, the way that supervisors act, the way that leadership act is going to trickle down and is going to have an effect on the way that employees act. So you want your environment to be one of mutual respect. Okay, so what do you want to have in your anti-harassment policies? First, I will tell you that last month the EEOC issued an informal guidance. And an informal guidance is basically them giving you some advice as to what they think should be included in policies and training. If you would like more information about that guidance, you can send me an email and we'll make sure to get it to you. You can also, you can Google for it. It's called the Promising Practices for Preventing Harassment. Say that 10 times fast. And it has different steps that you can take in terms of the policies that you have, the training that you have, and what the EEOC thinks employers should be doing, which is always good, since they're the ones who are going to be addressing a complaint if it goes to litigation. So, according to the EEOC and according to experts in this area, you want to make sure, first of all, that your anti-harassment policy has multiple avenues for making complaints. You don't simply want to say, go to HR, because people may not be comfortable going to HR. You don't simply want to say, notify your supervisor, because the supervisor may be the problem. You want to have multiple different avenues that employees can go to in order to raise complaints as they need to. You want to make sure that all employees have a responsibility for reporting harassment if they see it or hear it. That you want to make bystanders, you want to make them engaged in the process, and you want them to be protecting and responding to harassment as they see it. You also want to make sure that your policy says that the employer is going to provide prompt, impartial, and a thorough investigation. And you want to do that, and we're going to talk about what an investigation should include in just a minute. You want to, in your anti-harassment policy, you want to explain how the investigation is going to work. You want to explain that confidentiality will be maintained to the fullest extent possible. And although you cannot guarantee confidentiality, because you do have to be able to do an investigation, you want to make sure that you provide as much protection as you can for the confidential nature of the information. And you also, and this is very, very important, you also want to make sure that it's clear in your policy and in how that policy is explained to employees that retaliation is not going to be tolerated. Retaliation is not going to be tolerated against people who make the complaints, against people who participate in the investigation or provide information. Okay, so training. In addition to having a policy, it doesn't do any good to have a policy if you don't publicize that policy and if you don't train people on that policy. Who should be trained? At a bare minimum, supervisors, managers, and team leaders should be trained on how to avoid sexual harassment, how to prevent it, and what to do if they see it. More and more employers are training all of their employees on the basics of anti-harassment policies, and that's something that we encourage our clients to do. If you do provide training for all of your employees, you are going to want to provide additional training for your managers to explain to them exactly what their specific duties are and their specific responsibilities. Your training needs to be tailored towards your organization. It needs to provide a clear explanation of the employer's policy, and it needs to provide a clear explanation of management responsibilities. It's often helpful to provide examples of what sort of behavior should be reported, what sort of behavior is included within the policy, and the training should be live, if at all possible, live and in person, and comprehensive. So, true or false, a formal complaint to HR must be made before you have an obligation to respond. Obviously, that's something that's false. If you hear, or if an employee comes to you informally and makes a complaint about harassment, you need to treat that just as you would a formal complaint. If an employee comes to a supervisor and says, I'm having this problem, but please don't say anything, then you have to say to them, respectfully, I can't not say something. I have to say something. This is something that has to go to human resources or go further up the chain. We will do our very best to maintain the confidentiality, and you should, of course, remind them that the company does not tolerate any sort of retaliation. But there's no such thing as as a secret complaint, or I'm having this problem, but please don't tell anyone. You do not want to be the person who does not report that, because who knows who else is having a similar problem. It is something that an organization needs to deal with, and they need to deal with it quickly, and they need to deal with it thoroughly. So you need to do a prompt, thorough, and impartial investigation. That means you need to be careful as to who you use for an investigator. If it is going to be somebody within the organization, you need to make sure that that person is not going to be negatively impacted by the potential results of the investigation. You also don't want that person to have a reporting relationship with the person who's accused of harassment. Oftentimes HR, in a large organization, an HR person might be the best person to conduct an investigation, but in smaller organizations that may not be the case. So each investigation is its own entity. All of them have their own special challenges, and you need to make sure that the person who's going to be conducting the investigation can do so in an impartial manner. Otherwise, the investigation is not going to be worth much in terms of responding to the complaint or defending against litigation later on. The investigation should be as confidential as possible. Obviously, you cannot promise complete confidentiality, otherwise you wouldn't be able to conduct an effective investigation. But it should be as confidential as possible, and you should tell all of the people that you are interviewing or speaking to as part of the investigation, you should encourage them to keep it confidential. The EEOC does have guidelines for how to conduct investigations, and those guidelines have existed for quite a while. Again, that's something that we can point you to if you send us an email. And also, you want to make sure that you're following those guidelines, because if something does end up in litigation and your investigation falls severely short of those guidelines, then it may not be worth as much as you'd like it to be in terms of defending against a case. The investigator is going to want to interview the victim, the alleged harasser, and any witnesses, and also just basically follow the information where it leads. You want to make sure that after you interview the victims and the witnesses, that they understand that the company has a non-retaliation policy, and that if they feel that they are being retaliated in any way, you need to encourage them to come and see you and notify you of that. It also may be appropriate to take remedial action even while the investigation is going on. If you have someone who's being accused of harassment, you may need to reassign that person, you may need to put them on leave, you may need to just simply tell them not to speak with or interact with anyone, not to speak with or interact with the person who's accusing them of harassment. But you shouldn't wait until after an investigation is complete to take actions to protect employees. If the employees need protection, then you should take interim remedial measures. When you're done with your investigation, you're going to want to create a report. And really, it's something that you should be working on throughout the investigation to keep your notes fresh in your mind and to keep them as comprehensive as possible. The investigation report is going to be a key document if anything goes to litigation. If the employee files a EEOC charge or they file a lawsuit, the way that you investigated the complaint is going to be key in defending against that action, and the investigative report is going to be key to showing that the company took the allegations seriously and took prompt and a thorough action to address them. So you're going to want your investigative report to describe all of the aspects of the investigation. You're going to want to keep interview notes of all of your interviews of witnesses. You're going to want to include any credibility determinations that you made as it relates to those witnesses. Did the person seem nervous? Did they seem uncomfortable? Did they seem hesitant to provide information, or did they seem far too eager to provide information? What are their potential motives? Those sort of things are things that you're going to want to make note of, because as the investigator, you need to make credibility determinations in order to do the next thing, reach a conclusion. And it's important that your investigative report includes a conclusion, even if the conclusion is that you cannot substantiate the complaint, or that there's a disagreement or a dispute between the what the witnesses say. You still want to have a conclusion and state that you either found the complaint to be credible, or you found there to be evidence of it, or you didn't find any evidence, or that the evidence was conflicting, and explain how the evidence was conflicting. Once you reach a conclusion, you're going to want to take remedial measures. This can include training, it can include discipline, it can include termination if necessary. Even if you can't make a final conclusion that the complaint of harassment is true or not true, you still are going to want to take some sort of remedial measures. Usually that's going to include training people and providing them with refreshers as to what the policy is, and make sure if you do that, that you make note that they went through the refresher, and you document it in their employment file, or you document it in the investigative report to show that you followed through with the remedial measures. It also is important to communicate the findings to the employee who complained as appropriate. Now, they don't need to know everything. What they do need to know is that you took the complaint seriously and you took action against if it was found to be substantiated, that you took remedial action. And so you want to make sure that they know that you took their complaint seriously and that they were heard. Okay, so a quick note about retaliation. Retaliation is a big problem. More than 44% of the EEOC charges that are filed include a retaliation charge. Retaliation claims are usually more dangerous than the claims of harassment or discrimination themselves. It's the old adage of it's not the crime, it's the cover-up. You want to be very clear that with everybody involved that you have a policy against retaliation. You want to be very clear with the person who has been accused of harassment that they cannot retaliate against anybody. And you want to make sure that employees know that they need to come to you and they need to tell you if they feel that they are being retaliated. You need to protect your organization from retaliation claims as much as you need to protect your organization from harassment claims. Okay, so in summing up here are some of the key points to remember. You want to make sure that you encourage reporting of complaints. That is both by the person who is a victim and also by bystanders. You want to take any complaints that you receive, whether they are formal complaints or informal complaints, seriously and address them promptly. Generally speaking, we recommend that you address them within 24 to 48 hours, if at all possible. You want to allow employees to bypass the normal chain of command. Don't tell them that the only person they can report the harassment to is their supervisor, because the supervisor may be the problem. You want to do your best to respect the confidentiality as best as you can while still conducting a thorough investigation. You need to strike that balance between confidentiality and the need to investigate. You need to make sure that you're protecting everyone's rights, and you need to take corrective action promptly. So if you have any other questions, please contact us. Thank you for attending our webinar, Preventing and Dealing with Sexual Harassment in the Workplace. Don't delay, handle it now. To learn more about this program and other Weber Gallagher events, you can go to our website, www.wglaw.com/WG-University. Thank you. Have a great day.